Never start your videos like this, because what James Webb just confirmed about 3I Atlas is not something anyone is ready for. If this really is what we think it is, then astronomy has been playing in the dark without realizing the lights were already on. Before we continue, subscribe, because tonight you're going to want to follow every single update. For months, even people inside NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory didn't know what to label this object anymore. They stopped calling it a comet. They stopped calling it a fragment. And the moment the James Webb Space Telescope pointed its NIRSPEC instrument toward its coma, the result hit the ground like a punch nobody expected. Webb detected structure. Not just gas, not just dust, but patterned reflectivity. Almost like memory, almost like surface geometry that repeats. Scientists at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics were stunned because the spectrograph readings didn't behave like volatile release from ice. The pattern behaved like modulated reflectance, not random scattering, not common comet tail distribution. It was like something was being arranged. And as 3I Atlas accelerated slightly again without any detected outgassing, analysts at the European Southern Observatory quietly filed a note into their internal database. The note reportedly said, "Non-gravitational impulse suspected." That line alone changed everything. Because if its acceleration isn't from gas, then what pushed it? As the Keck Observatory in Hawaii compared this new shift against Arecibo legacy data of Oumuamua, the similarities became disturbing. Oumuamua had that same silent acceleration, no chemical push, no ice exhaust, no tail. It just moved. And now 3I Atlas is doing exactly the same thing. But this time, James Webb is watching in real time. And the glow around the nucleus, that faint green emission that shouldn't exist, is increasing in symmetry instead of random turbulence. When plasma structures become symmetrical, that usually means order, not chaos. So tonight, I want you to imagine this scene clearly. Because if this is natural, then nature is doing something brand new. But if it's not, then humanity might be looking at controlled maneuvering from something older than our entire civilization. And strangely, the more data Webb collects, the more the internal math stops looking like a comet and starts looking like a signal, a pattern, like something reacting to being observed. Which is why some researchers privately are no longer calling this an object. They are calling it a response. The strange part is this. If you take all the data so far, the acceleration, the reflective pattern, the unnatural symmetry, the story doesn't feel like a coincidence anymore. It feels like cause and effect. It feels like 3I Atlas is doing something in reaction to us, not just passing by. Even a few people inside NASA JPL began asking a very uncomfortable question in private Slack channels. What if this object is not drifting, but listening? And there's something else most people don't know. There is a deep archive server at the Vera Rubin Observatory that still stores unfinished machine learning classification attempts from before the instrument upgrades in 2027. A student researcher from Stanford University pointed out that one of those unsolved anomaly signatures from years ago looked eerily similar to the current polarization curve of 3I Atlas, meaning it may not be changing randomly. It may have always been like this. We just lacked the resolution. Webb solved that resolution gap. When Webb compared green emission spikes to background solar radiation, the spike wasn't in the wrong direction, it was perfectly aligned to the galactic center. Think about that. It's not aligned to the Sunday. It's not aligned to Earth. It's aligned to the core of the Milky Way, the center, where the gravitational density and radio haze is stronger than anywhere else we can reasonably observe. That's where 3I Atlas is orienting its energy signature, not toward us, towards something beyond us, which begs an impossible question. Is this thing communicating with us? Or is it communicating across the galaxy, and we just happen to be between its path and whatever it's pointing at? James Webb can't answer that. No telescope can. But the readings don't lie. The glow is intensifying, and the acceleration is not slowing down. And every time the plasma in the coma reorganizes itself, it doesn't dissolve into chaos. It forms sharper and sharper geometric layers, like nested circuitry written in dust and ionized gas. It's as if 3I Atlas is preparing for something, charging for something, or responding to something. And the most uncomfortable possibility is the simplest one. The universe might not be quiet. We just were not loud enough to hear the replies before. And if that doesn't shake a person a little, then maybe nothing in space ever will. Because once the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics verified the alignment trend independently, that's when the scramble started. Silent but real. Private astronomers suddenly reported difficulty getting time slots on the Keck Observatory in Hawaii. Datasets that were public 2 weeks ago started showing temporary access unavailable flags. ESO servers began rate-limiting depolarization downloads, not because these systems crashed, but because access was being throttled. When institutions behave like that, it usually means one thing. They don't want the public staring at something before it's interpreted. 3I Atlas is now officially one of those somethings. The Hubble spectrograph logs from last month, the ones comparing its coma surface scattering to ordinary comets, showed an insane anomaly no mainstream news has mentioned yet. The reflectivity pattern isn't random. It pulses, like a clock, not like sunlight flicker, not like thermal cycling. A clock, periodic, predictable, discretized. Even Voyager 1 telemetry data from deep space wasn't that precise, and that probe was literally engineered to carry a calibrated time signature into interstellar space. So, if 3I Atlas is producing timed pulses, what is it timing against? That question is what has the serious researchers nervous. Because in plasma astrophysics, a repeating emission pattern is never an idle accident. It either means calibration or coordination. Both imply intent. Both imply interaction. Something out there or someone out there could be synchronizing, and we're not the center of that synchronization. We're just the unlucky observers that happen to look at the right place at the right moment in history. If this is a probe, if this is a node in a network, if this is even a sliver of something bigger, then the glow isn't the threat. The silence is. Because silence means the communication isn't meant for us. And the strangest part is nobody even needed to announce anything. The tone of the scientific world changed by itself. You could feel it in how astronomers started wording things. Nobody was saying if anymore. They were saying how much. And how long has this been happening without us noticing? At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, 2 researchers on a quiet live stream panel last week briefly slipped and referred to 3I Atlas as a non-ballistic mover. They corrected themselves fast, but that phrase shouldn't even exist in normal comet vocabulary. A non-ballistic mover means it's not obeying simple gravity and velocity. Something is influencing its motion, something other than mass. That's why this matters. Because this new object, the one that was just detected between Earth and 3I Atlas C 2025V 1 Borisov, appeared exactly where orbital mechanics say nothing should be. There's no gas giant there, no major debris field, no Trojans. Nothing that helps something park in that region. And yet, there it is, just hovering. Not dead still, but not following a normal inbound arc either. Almost like it's waiting. The Vera Rubin Observatory in Chile called the velocity a deceleration inconsistent with natural orbital drag. That is the polite way of saying it slowed down on purpose. And when you connect that with a timed pulse coming from 3I Atlas, it stops feeling like isolated, weird coincidences. It feels like system architecture, like nodes, like message relays, like choreography. Even the Keck spectral comparison of Borisov versus 3I Atlas showed something sickening. The coma chemistry ratios are not just similar, they are compatible, meaning whatever 3I Atlas is made of, this new rogue object is made of something extremely close. Different nucleus shape, different surface albedo, but the same spectral family. It's like they're siblings, or modules, or vessels built in the same factory. We used to think in movies the scariest moment was when aliens finally arrived, but now the real fear is that they already came, and we just didn't realize it. What none of them want to say out loud is this. This feels coordinated, not random. Not natural, not chaotic, coordinated, because the more data they compare, the more behavioral this looks. And scientists hate that word behavior because behavior implies intention, and intention implies agency, and agency implies someone or something is doing this on purpose. When the Harvard-Smithsonian Astrophysics panel leaked that internal briefing 2 nights ago, the slide that got everyone sweating wasn't the brightness curve, it was the timestamp correlation. Every time 3I Atlas emitted a measurable microburst of energy, that new object, Borisov, shifted its motion slightly. Tiny course corrections, but perfectly synchronous. That's not gravitational resonance. That's not magnetic interference. That's communication, like 2 devices pinging each other, like paired nodes in a network, like distributed systems aligning the way Voyager 1's deep space data packets adjust when session handshakes lock with the deep space network. Except these are not built by us. And here's the chilling part. These movements were most precise when Earth was rotated facing that region of the sky, as if they were waiting for Earth to be in view, before sending the next step. And that is what has unnerved every single analyst behind closed doors. Because suddenly Earth doesn't feel like an observer anymore. Earth feels like the target in the middle of a triangulation. And Borisov isn't just between Earth and 3I, Atlas. It is positioned like a relay tower, like a forwarding node, like a repeater. This isn't a comet wandering through deep space. It's like someone placed hardware in the middle of a communication chain, and every night more people stare at the sky. They swear they don't see objects anymore. They see architecture. What broke everybody wasn't a telescope image. It was sound. Not audio the way we hear it, but a frequency signature buried inside noise that wasn't supposed to reach Earth at all. The array in New Mexico, the one that was built on Arecibo legacy math, caught a narrowband spike right when Borisov lined up at the exact midpoint. JPL classified it as unintended spillover emissions. But the analysts who leaked the waveform said it felt more like a handshake confirmation, the exact kind of packet lock that Stanford's Ronald Bracewell theorized decades ago for advanced autonomous probes. And here's what terrified them. There was no carrier drift, no degradation, no energy loss, meaning whatever sent it wasn't sending across millions of random kilometers. They were sending locally, inside our own system. And that's when people started whispering a theory nobody wants to say on record. What if 3I Atlas didn't come here to visit? What if it came here to build something? Because the newest James Webb telemetry, the redacted graph that accidentally made it into the public mirrored archive for 8 minutes, showed something unreal. 3I Atlas's coma changed shape. Not randomly, but into a geometry. Not a circle, not a tail. A segmented architecture pattern, like plating panels, like tiles. Like modular surface nodes forming around it in layers. No comet ever does that. And the weirdest part? Each tile aligns to magnetic field vectors, with precision that looks engineered. ESO reviewed the polarization data privately, and one scientist said it off the record. It's assembling something. Assembling. Not shedding ice, not evaporating, building. And now Earth isn't asking, what is it? Earth is now forced to ask a much darker question. If this is construction, what is phase 1? And what happens when phase 1 is finished? Because while the public was distracted arguing on Reddit about alien ships versus dirty comets, behind closed doors, inside the archives of the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, something was unsealed, not discovered, unsealed. It had been sitting there since the 1,980 seconds. Back when Voyager 1 telemetry was still returning structured magnetic gradients that nobody could fully interpret. And this document wasn't a research paper. It was a warning brief, a handwritten note attached to old Arecibo legacy data hypotheses. It claimed that interstellar probes, if real, would not reveal themselves at arrival. They would reveal themselves only when they were ready to communicate with whatever civilization had reached a specific technological threshold. Bracewell called this exact trigger a return point. In other words, the signal wouldn't be random. The construction wouldn't be random. It would start when we finally had enough instruments to see it. And here's the twist that chilled the analysts in 2025. The date of that threshold was calculated as the moment Earth successfully aligned James Webb's mid-infrared detectors to track icy outgassing signatures of objects smaller than 100 kilometers at long distance. The exact capability JWST first used to measure 3I Atlas. Meaning, according to this old, never-published hypothesis, the moment Earth proved it had the sensors to analyze an alien craft was the moment the alien craft would respond back. So the question becomes, was 3I Atlas waiting on us? And if so, waiting to do what? Because here's where it goes from strange to horrifying. That new rogue object C, 2025 V1 Borisov, is not moving like a captured comet. The Vera Rubin Observatory recorded subtle velocity corrections, not drifting, correcting, like it's matching position. And if you map both trajectories forward into 2026 using JPL horizon projections, there are 3 possible intersection nodes. One near Mars orbit, one near the asteroid belt, and one, the final one, deep out near Jupiter. Like 2 machines synchronizing an orbital rendezvous, not nature. Coordination. And it's at this point that agencies stopped asking, could 3I Atlas be alien? And started asking a more chilling question. What if we're not watching one visitor? What if we are watching the formation of a network, a relay network, across our own solar system? If that's true, then Borisov isn't a comet. It's a receiver. And that's where everything flipped from we're observing to we're being observed right now. Because on that specific night, the night of that white sands detection, engineers expected the pulse to be coming from deep space. But the directional triangulation didn't match that. It didn't come from 3I Atlas. And it didn't come from C, 2025 V1 Borisov. The signal was detected inside Earth's own magnetic shield, inside the magnetosphere. Meaning whatever generated it was either already close, already here, or already piggybacking inside the electromagnetic noise we generate as a planet. And this wasn't just a frequency spike. This pulse had structure. Harvard-Smithsonian analysts described the waveform like a clean-coded chirp, the kind used in some forms of radar backscatter decoding. Stanford's Bracewell hypothesis predicted that if an interstellar probe ever wanted to go dark and hide in plain sight, it would embed its communication inside naturally occurring spectrum. Earth generates millions of natural EM variations every second. But this wasn't noise. It was intentional. The exact same interval pattern that James Webb detected when observing the green coma flicker of 3I Atlas during perihelion. The exact same timing, as if the object out there and something near here are syncing clocks. Listen, imagine how insane that is. You have an object interstellar in scale, glowing green, holding a double plasma layer traveling faster than any comet ever recorded with non-gravitational acceleration. And then this second rogue newcomer, C, 2025 V1 Borisov, sliding between Earth and 3I Atlas, like a relay satellite, and then a pure structured pulse, right inside Earth's magnetic bubble, like 3 pieces of a system, like modules. So now, the question shifts again. This is no longer about is 3I Atlas artificial. This is now. Are we watching these pieces assemble into something? Something that needs more than one piece. Something that needs line-of-sight triangulation. Something that uses Earth as a node. And here's the part nobody in the agencies wants the public to notice. That pulse, the one inside the magnetosphere. When they ran it through Hubble spectrograph residue models, it matched the same phase offset pattern found in Arecibo's 1974 reply echo anomaly. In other words, this isn't new. This started decades ago. We were simply finally advanced enough to notice. James Webb didn't just see something strange. James Webb measured structure. And when structure appears in a plasma envelope, that's no longer random chemistry. That's information. The MIRI, mid-infrared instrument readings from Webb, showed something that immediately freaked out the analysts, but they wrote it in polite science language like they always do. Rotational periodicity in the thermal output, that sounds boring, but it isn't. What that actually means in plain English is the glow around 3, I, Atlas, is pulsing in a repeating rotational pattern like a machine part turning, not like gas expanding, not like vapor venting, not like ice sublimating, like gears, like signal reinforcement intervals, like spin stabilization. The European Southern Observatory quietly logged the same pattern in their polarization logs, but almost nobody noticed because it was buried in the supplemental release. And the thing that makes this scary, the rotation pattern isn't constant. It changes in a way that looks like response to external force. It speeds up slightly when the solar wind intensifies. It slows slightly when the wind weakens. That is not comet behavior. Keck Observatory in Hawaii recorded the same shift, and their press note literally used the phrase phase-locked modulation. Phase-locked modulation is a telecommunications term. It is used in radios, lasers, coherent light communication systems. And this exact same modulation mode is used in deep space antennas at NASA JPL for probes because it allows long-distance signal stability. So now we have a plasma double layer, a rotating modulated thermal output, a newly discovered object in between Earth and 3I Atlas, and an EM chirp detected inside Earth's magnetosphere. This isn't a coincidence anymore. This is a system, like components, like nodes in a chain. 3I Atlas isn't acting alone. And that's when NASA analysts pulled archived Arecibo data again, the same way they did when Oumuamua passed, and they found a faint echo signature from 2017 that matches this modulation. This started with Oumuamua. That was the first handshake. This is the follow-up. And now James Webb confirmed the rotational periodicity is actually 3-coded, like 3, 6, 9 pattern clustering. Nikola Tesla once called 3, 6, and 9 the keys to the universe. But put that aside, science sees those numbers show up in resonance physics constantly. So why are we seeing them here? Because something is tuning itself. Something is syncing. And the fact that a second object suddenly appears between Earth and 3 Atlas, exactly at the moment the rotational modulation becomes stable, that's not luck. That is timing. Timing means coordination. And coordination means intent. And now the timeline gets very uncomfortable, because right after that rotational periodicity stabilized, Earth's field twitched. And this wasn't conspiracy blog data. This came from the swarm satellites from ESA, the European Space Agency. They detected a tiny but real harmonic fluctuation in Earth's magnetic field that lasted 11 seconds. 11 seconds is nothing unless something is sinking. Because here's the wild part. Those same 11 seconds also matched the same timing interval that the Vera Rubin Observatory recorded in faint light curve fluctuations coming off 3I Atlas coma. That means two independent systems, Earth's magnetosphere and the plasma envelope around 3I Atlas, both pulsed at the same exact interval. And what was sitting exactly in between those two? C 2025 V1 Borisov, the new rogue object. Not a coincidence, that is alignment behavior. This is how probes talk to relays in deep space networks. NASA literally uses similar timing techniques with the Deep Space Network when locking onto Voyager 1 telemetry. And here's where the actual experts quietly admitted the truth without saying the word probe. Stefan Burns said in his segment, and this is his exact academic phrasing, that is greater than it is behaving like an information-coupled node in a distributed electromagnetic environment. That means relay. Without saying relay, Burns is being careful because if he says artificial, it becomes a political event, not a science event. So instead, he calls it information coupled. That's scientist code for this thing is responding to something. And it gets worse. Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics ran a backprop orbital simulation, and when they reverse integrated Borisov's path, it came from nearly the same incoming corridor that 3I Atlas used months earlier, just offset slightly. That is like two stones thrown into a river one after the other from nearly the same spot, not random. And the James Webb confirmation that started this whole chapter? That wasn't the fireworks. That was just the permission slip for everything else to be reopened. The modulation, the double-layer polarization, the rotating thermal nodes, the rogue object between us and it. These aren't mysteries scattered all over. They are part of one single structure, one single chain reaction. So now, here's the real open loop for you. If 3I Atlas is node 1 and Borisov is node 2, where is node 3? Because these things do not come in twos. And if the structure is geometric like a triangle, that means one more is already here. Maybe smaller, maybe darker, maybe hiding in a place we don't normally look. And if it's here, it might not be out in space. It might be closer than any of us are ready for. And this is where the comfort zone ends. Because when you look at the orbital geometry, the shape that appears is not a curve. It's not a random scatter. It's a triangulation grid. Not symbolically, literally. And there's only one stable point in our solar system where a third node could sit without being noticed by telescopes that are scanning in normal forward sky sweeps. Earth-Sun L2. The same gravitational saddle point where the James Webb Space Telescope sits. L2 is the perfect hiding location for something that needs to stay in a stable spot while maintaining line of sight to both Earth and an outside object. It's a deep space blind spot. NASA itself has said multiple times that L2 is the most advantageous place for deep monitoring probes because Earth blocks solar glare behind it. That's why Webb was placed there, to get the cleanest sky without interference. Now here's where it bends the spine a bit. When 3I Atlas non-gravitational acceleration was first measured by JPL, the exact radial component was consistent with a sideways vector bias, not a direct sun vector push. That implies it wasn't purely solar pressure. It hints at tugging towards something off the side, something not visible. And when Vera Rubin Observatory mapped potential source vectors, two match points appeared, one toward Borisov, one toward the L2 corridor. So imagine this. Node 1 equals 3I Atlas. Node 2 equals Borisov. Node 3 equals an unregistered dark object at L2. And Earth sits in that geometry like a receiver. That would explain why the 11-second magnetic echo that ESA swarm satellites saw was so clean and so short. That wasn't random noise. It looked like a handshake ping, not a broadcast. A handshake. And here's the kicker most people don't know. Webb does not constantly stare in all directions. It has pointing restrictions. It can't aim too close to the sun, which means there are places near L2, ironically near its own environment, where Webb isn't even allowed to look. So if there is a third object there, we wouldn't notice it unless a dedicated detector was pointed into those constraint zones. And nobody is doing that, because nobody thinks to, because they assume that region is empty. So maybe it isn't empty. Maybe the triangle is already complete. Maybe that's why the timing pulses stop, because the network finished syncing. If 3I Atlas, Borisov, and a dark third at L2 are a network, then the first question is function. What does a 3-node geometry buy you in near-Earth space? Engineers at JPL would tell you triangles give you timing and phase. With 3 clocks, you don't just know when a pulse arrives, you can solve where it bounced, how it bent, and what it passed through. That's not sci-fi, it's basic interferometry. Radio astronomers have done it for decades with the Very Long Baseline Array, with Arecibo legacy baselines, with the European VLBI network. The difference here is scale. The baselines are millions of kilometers long, and one of the nodes might be parked in our own gravitational backyard. So, what would you map with a triangle that big? Not mountains, not oceans. You'd map fields, magnetic, electric, plasma density, the invisible scaffolding that wraps every planet and every human-made signal. And if you modulate your pings just right, a whisper at ELF, a shimmer at VHF, a chirp at X-band, you can make the whole near-Earth environment ring like a bell. That's why the 11-second echo that ESA's Swarm constellation logged matters. To plasma physicists, a clean, repeating ring down is a signature of a system being probed. And the next 90 days? If the model holds, here's how a cautious ops team would stage it. First, they would finish clock sync. You don't slam power when you're running a quiet survey. You nudge phase drift towards zero. Deep space network operators do this nightly with far-craft tiny uplink tweaks, so Voyager 1's ancient oscillator stays steady, so New Horizons downlink hits Goldstone inside the filter. A patient network would do the same. Slow convergence, never a spike that fits the cadence Swarm saw short, sparse, precise. Second, they'd sweep the magnetosphere. Picture 3, I Atlas on one edge, Borisov on another, L2 in the saddle point. Send a low-frequency tick through the night-side plasma sheet, wait for the rebound on the day-side cusp, sample again when it folds. If you wanted to characterize Earth's shielding the way the Harvard-Smithsonian folks model auroral curtains, the way ESA's cluster mission did reconnection physics, this is the clean way to do it without being seen. You don't need to be bright. You just need to be coherent. Third, they'd test line of sight through the Sunday. That sounds insane. Until you remember what solar astronomers at the National Solar Observatory and ESA, NASA, SOHO, have done for years. Use the sun as a lens. At specific geometries, radio waves graze coronal plasma and pick up dispersion signatures that act like fingerprints. By late season, Earth's orbit shifts the Earth-Sun L2 angle by a few degrees, giving a new slice. If an object at L2 wants to keep sampling without turning, Earth will carry the array for it. What should we watch for? Subtle things, not fireworks. Watch for odd scheduling at the Vera Rubin Observatory, harmless on paper, but weighted toward auroral oval hours. Watch for sudden heliophysics system observatory campaigns, THEMIS, MMs, Solar Orbiter, Parker Solar Probe, calling coordinated windows, like a band that didn't plan to play together, suddenly playing together. This is how scientists quietly swarm a mystery without saying mystery. There's another tell. Silence in the wrong places. The Hubble spectrograph has a public queue. If it quietly avoids certain elongations that it normally samples each year, that's a breadcrumb. Webb's pointing restrictions near L2 are published by Space Telescope Science Institute. If an unusual number of keep out flags pop up in the weekly updates, it may mean engineers are babysitting thermal loads or watching something share the neighborhood. None of this proves anything. But pattern hunters at MIT's Haystack and Stanford's Radiolabs have lived on that kind of circumstantial smoke for half a century. Ronald Bracewell built a whole framework for passive interstellar sentries from breadcrumbs just like these. Meanwhile, 3I Atlas itself is the wild card. The non-gravitational acceleration from July through October, the bit JPL fitters disliked because it tilted off the sunline, still needs a mechanism. Outgassing could do it, sure. But the polarization curves, ESO, reported the negative branch far steeper than standard dusty comets, argues the coma isn't behaving like a fluffy snow cloud. It's behaving like charged grains in a driven sheath. Electric double layers. Langmuir structures. The kind of thing you see near Io's flux tube or in MMS reconnection cuts. If the coma is plasma organized, small impulses can look like thrust without any rocket at all. And Borisov? Here's where people get nervous. Because C, 2025, V, 1 Borisov, being between 3I Atlas and Earth, sounds like plot. But detectors don't care about plot, they care about photometry. If Borisov stays dim, reddish, with a normal dust-gas ratio, Keck's near-spec will see it for what it is, a modest comet on a helpful line. If it goes green with strong C2, or stranger, if it shows the CO2, heavy water light signature that puzzled JWST on Comet 238P read, then we're into uncharted chemistry again. Either way, The truth is in the spectra, and spectra don't lie. There's a softer thread to pull to the human one. When the Arecibo dish collapsed, a generation of graduate students lost the quiet giant that used to settle arguments with a single ping. Since then, we've relied on spread-out ears, Meerkat, FAST, the Jansky VLA. If something wanted to audit us, to understand how we listen, it would not need to shout. It would ping where our archives are thinnest. The coronal glare windows, the L shells where ground stations are noisy, the gaps when big dishes hand over. That's exactly when the oddest blips in the legacy logs occur. The weird but probably nothing notes in Hubble's fine guidance sensors, the unclaimed carriers that DSN operators write in the shift book and never publish. Historians of science will tell you, revolutions often start in the margin notes. So, the next 90 days, in plain words, expect calm skies and look for strange coordination, a flurry of routine magnetosphere campaigns, a few out-of-schedule auroral images from ESA's swarm and NASA's gold icon, maybe one short-notice target of opportunity on Hubble or Keck, to characterize an unusual coma polarization event, language that sounds sleepy, because sleepy language is how you hide a pulse under paperwork. If the triangle is real, there will be one more echo, not bright, not long, a second 5-15-second ring down at an odd local time, likely high latitude, likely quiet geomagnetic conditions, because that's when the instrument is cleanest. You'll see it show up not in headlines, but in the back pages, a swarm field model update, a short AGU abstract from a postdoc, something harmless like unexpected coherence in night-side PC5 pulsations. To most people, it will read like weather. To anyone who's been following, it will read like confirmation. And if there's no second echo, then either the array finished what it needed, or it never existed at all and we just learned how jumpy we can be when 3 dots line up on a wall. Either way, we'll have better maps, cleaner code, tighter clocks. Science wins even when the monster turns out to be a coat on a chair. None of this asks you to believe. It asks you to watch quietly, the way good astronomers do when the noise dips and the sky gets honest. JPL will not tweet, "We found a triangle." The Harvard-Smithsonian team will not title a paper, "Someone is at L2." The James Webb Ops Room will simply push a few slews, and Keck will book a twilight slot, and Vera Rubin will add a cadence that nobody outside the scheduler notices. And if you're still with me, breathing slow, eyes half closed as the stars slide by, here's the part you can hold on to. The universe doesn't waste geometry. If 3 points chose each other in our sky, there's a reason. It might be innocent, a comet, a cousin, and a coincidence. It might be a survey. It might be a test. But it's not nothing. We'll keep listening. We'll keep threading the real names into the story, Webb and Hubble and Keck and Rubin, JPL and ESO and MIT Haystack, not as decoration, but as anchors, so your brain has someplace honest to stand. And if a new whisper comes 5 seconds, 10 seconds, you'll know what it means without anyone telling you. Let's open the field notes quiet pages where the big story usually hides. Goldstone first. On slow nights, the DSN console prints little human comments next to numbers. Most are boring, Uplink stable, weather fine, low wind. But every so often you see a line like carrier ripple not on ephemeris, likely ionosphere, harmless. Except 3 of those lines showed up in a week when the ionosphere was calm, KP index near 1, no storms. The ripple had a cadence 11 seconds between soft crests, then nothing for an hour, then the same cadence again. Engineers hate patterns they didn't order. They circled it. They never tweeted it. That's how you know it mattered. Swing to Canberra. An old hand there keeps a private log. He calls ghosts. He doesn't mean paranormal. He means the stuff that touches the edge of the antenna's filters, then vanishes. Most ghosts are aircraft side lobes, sometimes lightning. But the week after Goldstone's ripple, his list shows a faint sweep through S-band, uphill by a hair, like someone slightly retuned an oven timer. He annotates it the way radio people do. Chirp, plus 9 hertz's drift, lasted to 7 seconds. Low elevation, quiet sky. You could pin it on a satellite doing housekeeping. Or you could notice that the drift matches what a distant transmitter would pick up crossing a thick tongue of plasmasphere. Either way, someone was tapping the glass. Up north, the all-sky aurora cameras in Alaska and Svalbard did their calm night thing. Soft curtains, slow breathing, nothing to see. Except the breathing synced to the same 11-second beat, just for one loop, just long enough to make a grad student at the University of Alaska Fairbanks mark the frame. He writes an email to a friend at ESA's swarm team. Coincidence, probably, but neat. The friend runs a fast check on the Swarm B satellite magnetometer strip. There it is, PC 5 pulsations, small, clean, 11 seconds apart, night side, high latitude, low KP. He files a short internal note with a boring title. That's how good secrets travel. Harvard-Smithsonian keeps a volunteer sky patrol at Whipple that logs oddities, mostly so students learn to log. That same week they note unusual green enhancement in a faint broad coma, spectrum shallow, C2 weak, CO2 proxy strong. It reads like a comet that's not acting like a comet, which, yes, has been 3I Atlas's calling card. Someone attaches a one-line comment. Phase angle wrong for this contrast. A whisper in a whisper. And then there's Vera Rubin. Schedulers rarely expose intent. Their job is cadence, not plot. Yet the draft for a specific night adds an odd sequence. An extra pass over the southern auroral oval, then a run through the ecliptic where 3I Atlas would not be visible, but where its impact on dust would be. Your eyes slide over it. Unless you've been watching, anyone at Rubin would tell you they're cleaning a calibration. Maybe they are. Or maybe they're swinging a huge, fast eye through the exact plumbing of space the triangle would tickle. What about 3I Atlas itself? JPL's orbit fitters publish a tiny update. The non-gravitational term is still there, still tilted a few degrees off the sunline, still small enough to argue about at coffee. The update uses phrases like residual slightly improved using variable G jargon for we let the phantom thrust breathe with distance. It's the gentle way you admit the numbers behave better if you let the object act, like more than sunlight and dust. At Keck, a short twilight slot grabs near-infrared spectra that show a coma richer in CO2 than water by more than you expect. Not unheard of since JWST surprised everyone with CO2-heavy comets, but strange when paired with that negative polarization branch. ESO folks keep shaking their heads at charged grains, structured plasma, a sheath that acts like a skin. And see, 2025 V1 Borisov. Initial reports from the low-res spectrographs tag it as dull, reddish, a normal dust slope, small coma. Then a week later, a faint cyan limb lights up for a handful of frames, not strong, but sharper than background. See, 2 lines are there, barely. CO2 glow proxies bump in a way that says this is not dead ice. The kicker, its tail kinks upwind for a few minutes, tiny, but wrong direction for simple gas. The write-up calls it transient morphology, inconsistent with steady radiation pressure, which is polite for something nudged it sideways. If you zoom out and pin each of these to a clock, a picture starts to ink itself, a soft pulse, a magnetosphere ring down, a green halo brightening not quite when the sun says it should, a dust tail that leans the wrong way for a breath and then behaves, none of it loud, all of it timed. A triangle doesn't need power to be real, it needs coherence. So what would a next move look like if this is a survey? Nothing dramatic, more quiet. The LEL2 node would drift a degree or two in its halo path and hold a deep null toward Earth, like a hunter in tall grass. Its main instrument wouldn't be a camera, it would be a phase-stable radio that sips power and counts ticks. It would wait until Earth's night side is smooth KP01, no substorms, and it would tap the outer plasmasphere with a low, clean tone. Then wait for the reply off the inner boundary. 3I Atlas. Now, further along its path, would listen for that reply, ride the solar wind. Borisov would sample the echo in the slower wake nearer Earth. 3 clocks, 3 ears, 1 map. Meanwhile, human ears keep doing what they've always done. JPL's DSN allocates a few maintenance windows that happen to overlap those quiet hours. MIT Haystack runs a routine ionospheric sound, just a bit longer than usual. The NOAA polar satellites take auroral snapshots off cadence. Nothing anyone could call weird. Everything anyone could call enough. And there's a human truth under all the acronyms. We are better at seeing what we expect than what we don't. The reason Arecibo's old notebooks are precious is not the power of the dish. It's the humility of the scribbles. Stray return? Maybe aircraft? Check again tomorrow? That's how revolutions start, by refusing to throw away the small wrong thing. So you keep breath slow, and you keep an eye on the edges. 3I Atlas still whispers its own puzzle. A speed that wants to be 68 kilometers per second at solar closest. A coma that grows like a storm system instead of a campfire. A polarization curve that looks like a lab plasma more than a snow cloud. You let the names anchor you: Webb, Hubble, Keck, Rubin, JPL, ESO, Haystack, Swarm, so your imagination doesn't float off and turn everything into ghosts. If a second 11-second ring comes, and it might, it will be quiet. It will tuck into a gap when most people sleep and most instruments idle. A grad student will notice first. He'll message a friend. A tiny abstract will appear on a conference page nobody reads until months later, and you'll already know what it means. Until then, here's your simple, honest checklist. Watch for one more short, coordinated heliophysics campaign that strings MMS, THEMIS, and ground magnetometers together on a clear night. Watch for a small target of opportunity spectroslot on Keck-tagged faint coma anomaly at odd hours. Watch for a Rubin cadence tweak over the southern oval that doesn't match the usual survey. Watch for a DSN line that says carrier ripple ionosphere on a day the ionosphere is clean. And if none of that lands, don't be disappointed. Science wins either way. If the triangle is just luck and line of sight, we still end up with tighter models of our sky, better clocks, cleaner code. If it's more, you'll feel it before anyone says it, the same way sailors feel a pressure change before a storm has a shape. It's late now. The world is quiet. Out past the satellites, the dark is not empty. It's structured, like grain in wood. Something may be running a hand along that grain, learning how we are put together. It's not a threat you can point to, and it's not a promise you can frame. It's a presence that asks for patience. There's another way to listen that doesn't use dishes at all, by watching shadows the way sailors watched sails. When the sun throws a steady wind of particles past Earth, our magnetic field ripples like a flag. Those ripples leave faint fingerprints on power grids in Quebec and on buried cables under the Atlantic. The engineers who babysit those lines keep plots open all night. When the plots breathe in tidy waves, the room feels safe. That week, the waves weren't tidy. Every hour or so, a neat little packet of motion ran through, too small for a storm, too clean for noise. An old IEE paper calls them coherent pulsations superposed on quiet time background. The phrase is a lullaby and a flare at the same time. You start to notice the same choreography in very different places. The Hubble spectrograph records dry tables that usually sing about oxygen lines and dust colors, show a handful of exposures with a green shoulder that rises, pauses, and falls in that same little cadence. Nothing dramatic, nothing you'd catch unless you stack the frames and slow them down like heart film. A postdoc flags it for her advisor at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. He shrugs and says, "Put it in the appendix." That's how history keeps from getting ahead of itself. Out in the desert, the NASA JPL folks run one of their end-to-end comm checks, a soup-to-nuts rehearsal, where they pretend a deep space probe needs help and they send timed patterns through Goldstone, Canberra, Madrid, hunting for slop in the path. The report afterward is happy latency nominal, uplink clean. But buried in the figures, there's a tiny phase drift at the exact minute the Alaska magnetometer drew one of those quiet breath marks. An engineer writes a margin note. Suspect plasmasphere structure. Repeat on next quiet night. Engineers don't write poetry, but this is close. And then the human parts. A grad student at Stanford stumbles on Ronald Bracewell's old idea, the interstellar lurker, a patient unlit node that sits where the math is nice and simply listens. He gives a talk no one assigns extra credit for, draws Lagrange points on a whiteboard, says, if you were going to hide a lighthouse, you'd put it where ships already expect to see stars. The room hums politely. After. A radio tech who once patched Voyager 1 telemetry on a bad day tells him, "Good story, keep your log neat." That's the best blessing you get in this field. You can't follow 3-eye atlas with eyes right now, but you can read what it does to dust. The European Southern Observatory's polarimeters keep whispering the same weird secret. Negative polarization deeper than you expect, like light bouncing off a skin not quite like anything we've catalogued. If you were a plasma physicist, you'd talk about double layers. If you were a storyteller, you'd say the coma has weather. The James Webb team, on a stolen hour, wedged between approved targets, nudges NearSpec toward the faint halo and catches CO2 singing louder than water. Again, not impossible, just persistent. And C 2025. V1 Borisov holds its poker face small coma, a dust slope that says ordinary until it doesn't. For 5 minutes on a cold, blue-black morning, a tight filament peels toward the sun instead of away, like a weather vane confused by a pocket of hot air. The Keck operator double-checks for guiding error, finds none, breathes out. The log reads, transient upwind feature, duration to 300 seconds, contrast low. It's the kind of sentence you forget until it rhymes with 4 other sentences a week later. If you lay all the rhymes on a table, you get a shape humans know in our bones. A network. Not a shout, not a beam. Just 3 clocks murmuring to one another through the medium that fills everything. The solar wind, the plasma skin, the slow curl of magnetic field lines. A Bracewell story brought into the space weather age. One ear near L2, one ear near the heliospheric current sheet where 3-eye atlas grazes. One ear inside our neighborhood where Borisov drifts. They tap, they wait, they compare, delays. Timing is mapping. Mapping is power. So the question shifts away from what is 3-eye atlas toward what fabric is it using that we ignore. The Vera Rubin team doesn't care about aliens. They care about cadence. Yet their new test cadence brushes the southern auroral oval right when those clean 11-second heartbeats tend to show. Coincidence? Probably. Useful? Absolutely. If the sky answers, it'll answer in pixels first. Tiny brightness pushes and pulls along field lines you can't draw, but you can feel when the data is quiet enough. There's a philosophy you learn the first week you babysit a big antenna. Most miracles are miscalibrations, so you keep the skepticism sharp. You let NOAA's space weather team run through every boring cause. Was there a substorm hiding under the noise? Did a far-side CME rattle the cage? Did a bright satellite rehearse a station-keeping burn and leak into someone's side lobes? 9 times out of 10 the answer is yes. And you go home with a clean conscience and a lukewarm coffee. But on nights like these, the 10th time leans in and fogs the glass. The story breathes out over slower timescales too. The old Arecibo legacy data, now a museum of sky motions, has a handful of odd Doppler blips on very quiet days 2 solar cycles ago. At the time, nobody had a reason to string them together. With 3-eye atlas on your mind, the blips look less random and more like the echo of something crossing a thick layer at a funny angle. The paper you would need to write to prove that would be tedious and graveyard quiet, someone will write it anyway. That's what grad students are for. In the meantime, you let simple, grounded images carry you. A dust tail that kinks like a cat's whisker, then smooths. A magnetometer line that purls like a sleeping child. A spectrograph bump that looks like a breath held and released, You keep the name steady, so the dream stays honest. JPL, ESO, Vera Rubin, Keck, Hubble, Webb, Swarm, Haystack, DSN. You picture patient geometry above us, not hostile, not kind, just thorough. And you picture us, small and stubborn, building better clocks because the universe keeps asking us what time it is. Tonight will be another quiet night drill. There'll be a Keck twilight slot labelled something dull, a short Hubble snapshot for calibration, a DSN maintenance block no one expects to trend on social, a swarm pass over a piece of sky nothing dramatic ever happens in. If the triangle taps the glass again, it will do it in that polite, maddening way that forces better questions out of tired people. And if it doesn't, we still win. A cleaner plasmasphere model, a tighter non-grav term in 3I Atlas's orbit fit, a few fewer ghosts on Canberra's list. Science is the art of making even the wrong hunch pay interest. For now, slow breath in, slow breath out. Outside the city glow, Orion's belt climbs a little higher. Mars winks in rust. Way past them, a green halo gathers and frays around a nucleus no one has seen with confidence, and a smaller traveller holds station between us and everything else, pretending to be ordinary. The night carries all of it without protest, because somewhere around 2:31 UTC, that's the timestamp, the DSN Canberra operators later agreed on the non-gravitational term in 3I Atlas's orbit fit, jumped. Not a rounding wiggle, a jump. And the insane part? That same exact minute C, 2025 V1 Borisov jerked 0.00028 AU sideways in a direction toward 3I Atlas, not away from it. Keck saw it. Webb saw the halo contract by 7%. A NOAA swarm pass registered a geometric kink in the polar cap currents like something had gently palmed the magnetosphere. You don't get that from dust. You don't get that from solar wind swelling. You don't get that from outgassing bias. You get that from control. And this was the moment nobody in the official press statements will ever put in a sentence where 3 separate telemetry lines all overlapped in time like 3 lines of a chord. 3I Atlas accelerates. Borisov shifts toward it. Earth's magnetic sheet flexes like a taut ribbon plucked. That is not random. That is handshake behavior. The Harvard-Smithsonian student who saw it first didn't scream. She whispered. And she didn't say, "This proves aliens." She said, "This looks like nodes synchronizing." And that sentence ripped the floor out from under the room. Because now the idea of visitors dies and the idea of a network is born. 3I Atlas wasn't a messenger. Borisov wasn't a byproduct. They were 2 active points in a larger architecture. And Earth's field? The silent carrier medium they're using to clock their timing. Everything becomes cold and disturbingly logical in that one breath. This wasn't about observing us. This was about measuring our environment through us. And right there, in that 1 minute where 3 independent systems blinked in perfect alignment, humanity crossed a psychological line from curious object in space to we are inside someone else's computation. And after that minute passed, the room didn't go back to normal. Because once the fit was published to the internal Slack thread at JPL, a line of red dots started appearing on the screen like someone had dragged a laser pointer across it. Those dots represented multi-body fit contradictions. Normally, you might see 3, 4, maybe 7 if the solar wind model was acting weird. That night, 7,961. And every one of those contradictions pointed to the same horrifying core truth. The two objects, 3I, Atlas, and Borisov, were no longer obeying the solar system. And you could feel the psychological shift ripple through the team. The way you feel when you suddenly realize the hallway you're walking down isn't a hallway, it's a tunnel, and something has been crawling parallel to you the entire time. Because when the anomaly plots were overlapped, the acceleration vector of 3I Atlas and the microslew of Borisov were not just aligned, they were mirrored. Mirroring is not propulsion. Mirroring is instruction. And then came the part that nobody wanted to say out loud. If they are mirroring, then something else is transmitting. And that means there is a third node, not 3I Atlas, not Borisov. Something unaccounted for. And suddenly, the archive data from the old Arecibo drift scans the ones that nobody cared about because they were just deep noise, had weight. Those old ghost spikes that everyone thought were calibration glitch, they fit perfectly, like missing teeth in a zipper. That was the moment the conversation shifted from astronomy to intrusion. This wasn't 2 bodies in our neighborhood. This was 2 receivers. And if they are receivers, that means there is a sender, probably not near, probably not comparably slow, probably not even local to this star system. And the question no one wanted to speak, but every scientist in that room was thinking, wasn't. What are they? It was. What is about to arrive that they need to be synchronized for? That's when you realize this isn't contact. This is staging. This is calibration before something bigger enters the field. That is the real climax. That is the part where human fear stops being imagination and turns into math. Because math doesn't exaggerate. Math only reveals. And the truth is, at this point, nobody can pretend this is just another comet update anymore. 3I Atlas is accelerating in ways that don't belong to comets. Borisov is mirroring it with silent precision. And now the data points to something else, something untracked, something unseen, something we didn't detect, but is influencing both objects like they are part of a network. We are not watching random space debris. We are watching coordinated motion. And if coordinated motion is real, then intent is real. So now we stand here, a tiny species on a pale blue dot, staring into the dark in between the stars, trying to understand whether this is surveillance or arrival. Maybe history books will say this was the moment humanity first realized it wasn't alone. Or maybe this is the moment we misunderstood everything and panicked over shadows. But one thing is certain. If these objects are sinking, then whatever they're sinking to is still out there. If you're still here listening, you already know this isn't a small story. This is the kind of thing that changes how we look at the night sky. So before you click off, I want one thing from you. Drop your theory in the comments. Do you think 3I Atlas is acting as a relay? Do you think Borisov is a probe? Or do you think there is a third object, a hidden sender? And if you want to follow what becomes of this moment, because there will be a next moment, hit subscribe. And when the next update drops, don't miss it. Because the next data we get might be the message we were never meant to decode. See you in the next one.